Before I tell you today's story, let me ask you a question. Imagine you're sitting in a room. Someone wearing a white lab coat asks you to press a button. Every time you press it, another person in the next room receives an electric shock. At first, it's 15 volts, then 30, then 60. The voltage keeps increasing. Eventually, the person starts screaming. They beg you to stop. Then they go silent. Now, here's the question. Would you keep pressing the button? Almost everyone says, of course not. That's exactly what psychologist Stanley Milgram thought in 1961. Milgram wanted to understand a question that haunted the world after World War II. How could ordinary people participate in terrible acts simply because they were told to? Instead of studying soldiers, he brought ordinary volunteers into a laboratory. The volunteers believed they were taking part in a study about learning and memory. They were told to administer increasingly stronger electric shocks whenever the student answered incorrectly. Here's the twist. The shocks weren't real. The person receiving them was an actor, but the volunteers didn't know that. As the experiment continued, the actor protested, shouted, complained of pain, and eventually stopped responding. Whenever a participant hesitated, the researcher calmly said things like, "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue." What happened? Shocked the scientific community. A surprisingly large proportion of participants continued administering what they believed was severe electric shocks simply because an authority figure instructed them to do so. Notice something important. Milgram didn't conclude that people are evil. His experiment suggested something more uncomfortable. Context and authority can influence ordinary people far more than we'd like to believe. Now think about your own life. Not electric shocks, but authority. How often have you agreed with something in a meeting because everyone else agreed? How often have you stayed silent because the senior person in the room had already spoken? How often have you accepted that's just how we do things without questioning it? That's why I think this experiment still matters. Not because it tells us that people always obey authority. It doesn't. But because it reminds us to ask one more question before following instructions. Do I believe this is right? History has shown us that progress often begins with people who respectfully challenge assumptions. Sometimes the hardest decision isn't saying yes, it's having the courage to ask why. Think about that. That's today's first principle.